This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally, yes.
It's an absolute riot.
Woo!
And the only movie that can be described as...
So much weirder than the last time. What last time?
It's the frequel.
You ready?
We've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays.
What deeply out-of-touch old person came up with that?
You did.
Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday. In theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado. Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
So good, so good, so good.
Ready to rack to school and save big? Get to your Nordstrom Rack store today for thousands of deals from just $20.
Because I want to look fresh.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
I got a new backpack.
Score everyone's favorite denim, sneakers, boots, and activewear from Nike, Levi's, Steve Madden, Madewell, and Free People. Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack. Shop Nordstrom Rack and make it the best school year ever.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised.
You never know, somebody could snatch your children away from you and whatever, so I hope that, if they go out tonight, they'll hold on to their kids.
Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 113, Deception.
Your mama loves you so much, and your daddy and his whole families love you so much, and you guys have got to be strong.
It was a dark night, after 9 p.m. on October 25th, 1994, and 23-year-old Susan Smith was desperately trying to outrun the seemingly never-ending seclusion. She was at the edge of the county, along the side of a road with tall trees on both sides. And then finally, she saw what she'd been looking for, civilization, or what must have felt like a beacon of hope when she surely needed it the most in all that darkness, and fear welling in her chest. Because her children were in grave danger, and that porch light, illuminating the first home she'd seen since she'd been pushed out of her own car as a stranger, drove away with her 2 boys, strapped in their car seats, wailing for their mother. This home was about 1/4 mile away from John D. Long Lake, and now Susan pounded on the front door, screaming for help. And when the door opened, Susan begged the woman who stood there, saying, "Please help me. He's got my kids and he's got my car." The woman beckoned Susan inside, and as she followed, she told her that a black man had her kids and her car. A man at this residence immediately called 911.
Yeah, there's a lady that come up that door, and some guy jumped into a red light with her car with her 2 kids in it, and he took off, and she got out of the car here at our house.
And he's got the kids?
Yes, ma'am, in her car. And she's real hysterical, and I just decided I need to call law and get them down here.
Get them going, Pam. They got 2 kids.
Then Union County Sheriff Howard Wells raced to the home, where Susan went into more detail about what had happened that night. How earlier she had stopped at a red light at the Monarch Mills intersection when suddenly this black man opened a passenger side door of her Mazda Protege and jumped inside. He then shoved the barrel of a gun into her side and told her to shut up and drive. Susan drove for a few miles until the stranger demanded that she stop. Then he told her to get out. It was then that Susan says she begged him to let her get her sons, Michael, who was just 3, and Alexander, 14 months. But the man refused, telling her he didn't have time for it. And then he sped away with her car and her boys, who were in the back seat, screaming for their mother. Now, at this time, Union County, South Carolina was a mill town with a population of roughly 10,000 residents. Union was a place where everyone knew everyone. The kind of town where when 2 little boys were abducted, people got involved. And right away, the county mobilized in a way it had never had to before. Everyone understood that if there was any hope of getting those little boys back, every second counted. And at that point, the only thing they had to go on was Susan Smith's description of the suspect, which is why Sheriff Wells called an artist who sat with Susan and drew a composite sketch based on her description of the alleged carjacker. A black man who was about 30 to 40 years old with a medium build, 5'9" to 6 feet tall, who weighed about 175 pounds. She said he had dark hair and dark eyes, and that he wore what was described as a toboggan or knit hat. This image was circulated to the local media to help galvanize the public for help. Meanwhile, a search helicopter flew over the nearby John D. Long Lake that was close to where Susan had been forced out of her car. In the air, heat sensors were used in an effort to find the car or the children as they flew over the lake and nearby forest. At the same time, police dogs searched the area on foot, and first responders were also on horseback, looking for any evidence of the boys, the car, or the carjacker. But none was found. And the parents of Michael and Alex, Susan and David Smith, who were at the time separated, came together as they made appeals to the public for help. Here's Susan.
I was stopped at a red light, and in a second, he was in my car. He just opened the car door, and I just screamed. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Shut up and drive."
A call center was quickly set up by the Union County Sheriff's Office with the help of the FBI.
Telephone tips are coming into the sheriff's office at a record pace.
And in town, concerned citizens, like this woman, passed out flyers and placed yellow ribbons around town.
You never know, somebody could snatch your children away from you and whatever, so I hope that, if they go out tonight, they'll hold on to their kids.
The story of the little boys who had been kidnapped in small-town America made national headlines. People around the country were glued to their television sets, transfixed as they watched the powerful images of a community rallying around these parents, Susan and David Smith, who were begging for help to bring their little boys home safe. And when these cries were paired with home videos of the boys, Michael and Alex, at a birthday party, it was gut-wrenching.
Pray every day that you're taking care of them, and know that we will do anything we will to help you to get them home back to us. I just can't express it enough.
Day by day, as every detail that could be reported on was, solidified the feeling that the nation was experiencing this heartache and grief alongside this couple in Union County, South Carolina. It was every parent's worst nightmare.
She was stopped at this red light when the suspect, armed with a handgun, jumped in the passenger side of the car and ordered her to shut up and drive.
But as the days passed, racial tensions within the community grew. Susan had claimed a black man had carjacked her vehicle and kidnapped her kids. And during the investigation, the fact that the description Susan gave was so generic, it struck fear throughout the African American community. Here's a man on the street being interviewed by WYFF News 4, who expressed his skepticism behind the motive of the alleged carjacker.
I'm a black man, and what would I want to drag a car and take, two white children for? What would I want to do it for?
And there were problems with Susan, herself, and her story. For one thing, despite the tears and wailing cries, she kept failing polygraphs. According to officials, when Susan was asked, "Do you know where your children are?" that's when the test showed the highest level of deception when she said no. The FBI agent who administered Susan's test noticed that she made fake sounds of crying with no tears in her eyes. So, as I mentioned, this is a really small town, and so it wasn't long before sources were telling local media that Susan had failed her polygraph test, and the rumors that were being quietly whispered within the community were getting louder. Did Susan Smith have something to do with her children's abduction? Susan would be interviewed multiple times because investigators had tried to verify her story, but things just weren't adding up. For one thing, the night of the kidnapping, Susan said that her son Michael had wanted to go to Walmart at 7:30. But in a later interview, she changed her story and said that she was the one who wanted to go to Walmart. However, when investigators went to speak to employees that were working that night at Walmart, none of them saw Susan and her kids. When she was confronted with that, she changed her story again and said she'd been driving around for a couple of hours with the boys, and that when she stopped at a red light at the Monarch intersection, that's when she got carjacked. But even that couldn't be true, because according to Susan, there were no other cars at the intersection when she got carjacked, which meant there couldn't have been a red light, because the traffic light at the Monarch intersection is constantly green unless another car on the other street triggers the signal to change. Another red flag was when investigators had found out that Susan had been dating a man named Tom Findley. When detectives spoke to Tom, they found out that he'd recently ended their romantic relationship in part because Susan had kids. When Susan was asked if the breakup had anything to do with her children's disappearance, she said, quote, "No man would make me hurt my children. They were my life." Investigators knew that referring to her children in the past tense wasn't a good sign. Even so, in a press conference, Sheriff Howard Wells tried to quell the rumors that Susan was a suspect.
We're trying to corroborate her story because not only is she the victim in this case, but the public is trying to make her the suspect as well.
Sheriff's investigators have found inconsistencies in accounts of those interviewed.
That's quite logical in a case like this, but to rule her out, we're going to have some hard and fast evidence. That's what we've not been able to develop in this case as of yet.
Susan and her estranged husband, David, sat side by side on a sofa for an interview with CBS This Morning, where she was asked point blank if she had anything to do with her children's abduction.
I do understand why they're having to do what they're doing. I'm all they have. Right now, they have not been able to rule anyone out. I don't think I'm any more of a suspect than anyone in this case right now.
It's very painful to know that anyone would think that either of us had anything to do with this abduction of our children. But me and my wife know the truth.
David may have lumped the two together because he didn't believe his wife had anything to do with their children's abduction. But as far as the investigation was concerned, David was not a suspect. He had passed his polygraph. But more than that, investigators noticed a marked difference between Susan's behavior and David's. David appeared as you would expect, shell-shocked. His facial features told the story of a man wrecked by fear, agonizing over the reality that his 2 children had been kidnapped and were in danger. At times, he was inconsolable. At other times, he tried to appear strong, but mostly throughout, he looked like a deer in headlights, just trying to make sense of what was happening. Essentially, what one would expect a parent's reaction to be. Whereas Susan seemed emotionless one minute, then she was giggling and appeared excited by all the attention she was getting from the news media, worrying about her appearance. But investigators noticed that Susan was absolutely consistent in one thing. Once those cameras started rolling, so did her tears. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in on Susan.
We have not turned up the car as of yet. We have not turned up the suspect as of yet. And we have not had a confirmed sighting on the children having been dropped off anywhere. We haven't recovered them.
Susan was confronted by Sheriff Howard Wells a final time. He brought her to a room at the First Baptist Church in Union, and he told her he didn't believe her, that all her stories had been lies because they hadn't been able to confirm anything she'd said. At some point, she asked him to pray with her, which he did. Then he broke the silence, saying, "Susan, it's time." And finally, after 9 days of the relentless searching for her children, Susan broke, saying, "I'm so ashamed," and she admitted that her boys were not all right. It was then that she told Sheriff Wells that she'd wanted to kill herself that night and began driving her car, eventually ending up in the woods off of Highway 49, where she took the road that led to the John D. Long Lake. She had plans to not only kill herself, but also her boys, because she believed that her sons were better off with God than if they were left without a mother. Susan explained that at the top of the boat ramp, she put the car into neutral, and it began to roll down the hill before she abruptly pulled the emergency brake. She did this a few times, but on the last time, she opened the driver's door and stood outside of the car. She then reached in and released the parking brake. And with the boys strapped inside, the car went hurtling down the boat ramp and into the lake. Susan's confession was not made public. Investigators still needed to perform the grim task of verifying her story. So on the afternoon of November 3rd, a portion of Highway 49 was cordoned off, the part that had a side road that led down to that boat ramp, the one with the steep hill. Despite keeping Susan's confession under wraps, it hadn't taken long for the media to get wind that investigators were at the lake and divers had been called out to the 80-acre man-made lake with depths that exceeded 80 feet.
Divers began searching John D. Long Lake. Instinctively, I asked the sheriff this question.
Do you consider her a suspect at all? Is there anything that leads you to believe that she might not be telling
We don't
the truth?
rule out anything at this time.
Divers searched the water as a small crowd of investigators silently observed. At some point that night, nearly 100 feet from the shore, and at a depth of 18 feet, the underside of Susan's upside-down Mazda Protege was found. Inside were the bodies of Michael and Alex, still strapped into their car seats. A tow truck arrived to the scene, and a cable was handed to a diver who connected a metal hook to the Mazda Protege, and then the sound of whirring as the maroon-colored car emerged from its watery grave.
A tow truck rolled in. Divers had recovered the missing Mazda Protege and the bodies of the 2 young children.
Over 9 heart-wrenching days, and then the shocking truth was revealed by Sheriff Howard Wells.
Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
The news that this same mother, who had looked into the eyes of the country and begged them for help to find her babies, was a gut punch.
The hardest part is not knowing, just not knowing.
But not only that, this same mother had made up the story that a non-existent black man had carjacked her and had kidnapped her children, and then brazenly deceived everyone for the last 9 days, knowing full well that her children were dead at the bottom of the lake.
I can't even describe what I'm going through. My heart is just, it just aches so bad. Whoever has them, I pray every day that you're taking care of them. To whoever has my children, that they please bring them home.
The betrayal stung, but Susan's actions, a mother murdering her own children, was beyond comprehension. This question, posed by a reporter on the scene in 1994, as Susan is placed in the back of a police car, with her head held down and hidden from cameras, seemed to sum up the latest revelation in this story, that she'd been arrested for the murder of her children.
Susan, why did you do it? Susan, why?
And the community had to come to terms with the fallout of Susan Smith accusing a non-existent black man of carjacking and then kidnapping her children.
Everything come up that's wrong, everything come up that's bad, first thing to do is fix the black man as the epitome of evil.
Susan Smith knew full well that the authorities were looking for a black man, and that those that matched her very vague description meant that a lot of African Americans were impacted by her lies.
As Susan Smith came to court this morning, an angry crowd was there to greet her.
Many were from Union's African-American community, angry not only at the death of 2 innocent children, but also at the racial aspect of the case.
Her lying about it, saying that a black man done it, she didn't have no business doing that.
For many African-American men in Union, the last 10 days have been uncomfortable.
Oh man, I had to walk very soft. You know, it's just like walking on cotton, you know. That was time that I wanted to go fishing, you know. But hey, I couldn't get caught, you know, going fishing. That was time that I wanted to go hunting. I couldn't go hunting. What if a black man would have got caught in the woods hunting with a gun?
This is bad enough, but wanting to pull up something else to make a racism thing out of it, that's just going to make the matter of the situation worse.
Also speaking publicly today was Scotty Vaughn, the brother of Susan Smith.
On behalf of my family, we want to apologize to the black community of Union.
Susan Smith's trial was scheduled for the following summer. In a case that had captivated the country, every hotel in town was booked. The prelude to a media frenzy of epic proportions. But the question remained, would there be cameras allowed in the courtroom? Here's Judge William Howard.
There is a substantial likelihood of interference with the court process.
So, no cameras. Susan Smith's trial would begin on July 18th, 1995. Since Susan had already admitted to killing her children, the trial would reveal the circumstances behind the murders, which was important, considering the lead prosecutor, Jimmy Pope, was asking for the death penalty. The prosecution said that Susan Smith murdered her children because her boys had become an obstacle to a love affair with her boyfriend, Tom Finley. Prosecutors made the case that to Susan, Tom Finley wasn't just any boyfriend in town. He was considered quite a catch, despite being average-looking and balding at 28 years old. Finley was wealthy. He lived at his father's mansion on an estate outside of Union. He was rich. Well, his father was. In fact, Susan worked at the mill that Tom Finley's father owned, and so did Tom. During the trial, it was revealed that on October 17th, 1994, just 8 days before Susan murdered her sons, Tom Finley had written Susan a letter. It started out, "Dear Susan, you will make some man a good wife one day, but unfortunately, it won't be me. We come from 2 different backgrounds." He would go on to say that he was a child of privilege, and she was the daughter of a mill worker who had a father who had taken his own life after his wife had left him. In the letter, Tom wrote, "Susan, I could really fall for you, but like I told you, some things are not suited for me. And yes, I'm talking about your children. I do not want children, and I don't want the responsibility of your children either." In closing, Tom would write to Susan, "Have a good time and capture some of the youth you missed out on. You have to make your own decisions in life. But remember, you have to live with the consequences also." The prosecution believed that Susan couldn't bring herself to give up her children because that would make her look bad in the community, where she wanted a future with her rich boyfriend, and to be the object of sympathy after losing her children. But the defense argued that this was a botched suicide attempt by an unstable woman who was rejected by the man that she loved. Susan's former boyfriend, Tom, would tell the jury that he'd had 2 intense meetings with Susan the afternoon of the killings, and he was worried that she would take her own life. But who could have foreseen that after their meetings, she'd drive around town and then head to the boat ramp, put the car in neutral and take off the parking brake, and then roll her maroon Mazda Protege down the boat ramp and into the John D. Long Lake with her boys strapped inside. That after she did this, she then took off running and screaming up the hill. According to testimony from the diver who plunged down into the cold lake that night, they were looking for Susan's car. He could only see about a foot in front of him. And when he saw the car, he would put his light against the window, where he saw a small hand pressed up against the glass. The boys were still strapped in their car seats and were hanging upside down in the car at the bottom of the lake. Inside the trunk of the car, Susan had placed her wedding photo album and wedding dress. Investigators also recovered from inside of the car the breakup letter that Tom Finley had written to Susan. The defense argued that Susan Smith was mentally unstable when she murdered her children. They presented evidence that she'd had a very difficult life growing up. Her father had committed suicide when she was 6 years old, that she herself had attempted suicide when she was 13 and also at 18, and that she was sexually molested by her stepfather, Beverly Russell, when she was just a teenager. The defense team hired psychiatrist Seymour Halleck to conduct a psychiatric evaluation on Susan. He would determine that Susan suffered from a dependent personality disorder and major depression. This meant that she constantly needed affection and becomes terrified that she will be left alone. Halleck also testified that Susan had sex with 4 different people 6 weeks before she murdered her children. Her estranged husband, David Smith, her boyfriend, Tom Finley, his father, Kerry Finley, the guy who owned the textile mill, and her stepfather, Beverly Russell, and that these sexual relations were proof of his diagnosis. After 10 days of testimony, the jury was sent out to deliberate. They returned with a guilty verdict in 2.5 hours.
We, the jury, in the Golden Child case, decided that Susan Smith be in prison in the state penitentiary for the balance of her natural life.
The prosecutor had sought the death penalty. However, the jury opted to give Susan life behind bars, thinking that that would be the harsher punishment, so that she would have more time to think about what she'd done. But the thing is, when the jury gave her life in prison, at the time, life didn't mean a person's natural life. And the law back then didn't allow the jury to know that life in prison didn't mean until she died. They didn't know that she would have an opportunity for parole. After serving 30 years, Susan Smith recently became eligible in November of 2024 at the age of 53. Here she is, speaking to the South Carolina Parole Board.
I know that what I did was horrible. And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alex with all my heart.
Of drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today?
That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really, really am. And I'm especially sorry to the drivers that I had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I didn't lie to get away with it. I really didn't. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know those just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do.
Here's former prosecutor Jimmy Pope, who strongly opposed Susan's parole.
The possibility is there they could release her. I am hopeful that that is unlikely. I think more they would look at the crime. Has she been rehabilitated? What has changed? Clearly her conduct in prison has indicated Susan has been thinking about Susan. She's had sex with guards, she's had, adventures with pen pals and social media.
For Susan to be released, she would need half of the 6-member parole board to sign off that she deserved to be released. But that didn't happen. Parole was denied. But going forward, Susan will now have the opportunity to plead her case to the parole board on why she feels she deserves her freedom every 2 years. David Smith, her ex-husband and the father of Michael and Alex, vows to be there every time to fight for his boys.
I'm not going to let what happened to them be in vain. I'll never stop fighting for their justice.
which is keeping her in prison where she belongs.
In researching this episode, the reporting of WYFF News 4 was extremely helpful, as was that of the New York Times. Up next, criminal mischief bonus content. Here, my co-host, Brandon Morgan, and I will discuss the case in more detail. And as always, thanks for listening. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.
Juvederm Day is coming on August 20th. For one day only, buy one $75 gift card and get one free. Juvederm Day gift cards can be used on any product in the Juvederm collection of fillers. Don't miss out on this once-a-year chance to save. Join Allie now while supplies last. Skin Beef by Juvederm is excluded from this promotion. Terms and conditions apply.